I'd given my parents my $150,000 trust fund. But when my Emily needed $120,000 surgery, they refused, funding my brother's $300,000 wedding. It's a special day. We can't disappoint, my father declared. 5 years on, they're broke and begging, clueless about how my payback was served. My gaze often drifts to a slightly worn photograph tucked into the corner of my desk frame. It's of my daughter, Emily, her eyes bright with an infectious 6-year-old's joy, a smear of chocolate ice cream on her chin. But sometimes when I look at it, another image superimposes itself. A younger version of me, barely 21, sitting in my father's imposing mahogany-paneled office. I remember the scent of expensive coffee and underlying anxiety that day, a stark contrast to the usual aroma of wood polish and success that permeated Hamilton and Company. Furnishings. My parents, Richard and Eleanor Hamilton, sat opposite me, their faces etched with carefully curated concern. That was the day I agreed to give them my trust fund, $150,000, money my grandmother had left for my future. It's for the family, Sarah, my father had said, his voice resonant with false reassurance. To secure all our futures during this temporary market downturn. You trust us, don't you, dear? Of course, I trusted them. I was young, idealistic, and desperate for their approval, an approval that always seemed to flow so effortlessly towards my younger brother, Mark. So I signed the papers, believing I was the dutiful, loving daughter shoring up the family legacy. For years, I believed that money had been a lifeline that saved their bespoke furniture business. Now, in my mid-30s, the shape of that trust feels different, sharper at the edges. I'm a graphic designer, married to David, a high school history teacher whose quiet strength is my anchor. Our life is comfortable, not extravagant, centered around Emily. We live in a modest suburban home filled with laughter and the delightful chaos a child brings. My parents? They still run Hamilton and Company, or rather, my father does. My mother, Eleanor, manages the social appearances, and Mark is supposedly being groomed to take over. He's their golden boy, engaged to Jessica, a woman whose tastes run as expensive as her ambitions. I learned early on that Mark was the show pony. I was the reliable workhorse they often forgot was still diligently running in their field. My career, a nice hobby in my mother's dismissive tone, rarely earned more than a passing comment, while Mark's every minor exploit was heralded as a sign of his impending greatness. Financial requests from them, disguised as temporary loans for the business or some unforeseen expense, were not uncommon. They were rarely repaid, but I conditioned myself to see it as part of the familial fabric. The delicate threads of our carefully managed family dynamic began to unravel on a crisp October afternoon. Emily was playing soccer with her usual boundless energy, her laughter echoing across the park. Then, she stumbled, clutched her chest, and collapsed. The world tilted, sounds became muffled, and the vibrant colors of the autumn day bled into a terrifying blur. The piercing wail of the ambulance siren became the soundtrack to my worst nightmare. The hospital corridor, sterile and smelling of antiseptic, became our waiting room. David's hand gripped mine, his knuckles white, his face a mirror of my own fear. Hours blurred into a series of hushed conversations with doctors, endless tests, and a growing dread that coiled in my stomach. Finally, Dr. Ramirez sat us down, her expression grave. Emily had a rare, aggressive congenital heart condition. She needed immediate, specialized surgery. The cost, after a modest insurance, was a staggering $120,000 required up front. $120,000. The figure echoed in the sterile room, a death knell to the fragile peace we'd built. Our savings were a fraction of that. Time was a luxury we didn't have. My first instinct, despite years of quiet financial frustrations and emotional sleights of hand, was to turn to my parents. They were family. Emily was their only grandchild. Surely, for her life, they would move heaven and earth. I called my mother, my voice choked with unshed tears as I explained Emily's diagnosis, the urgency, the cost. Her initial response was a carefully constructed facade of shock. "Oh, Sarah, how dreadful. That poor child. Then, the inevitable pivot. We're very stretched right now, dear, with all the preparations for Mark and Jessica's wedding. This is a huge expense, you understand. It's all rather overwhelming. My father, when he came on the line, echoed her sentiments, his tone businesslike. We'll need to discuss this properly, Sarah. See what can be done. Come to the house later in the week. We're having a small dinner for Mark and Jessica with her parents. We can talk then. A small dinner. My daughter's life was hanging in the balance, and they proposed to talk amidst a celebration. The irony was a bitter pill. The intervening days were a torment of anxiety. David tried to be optimistic, a rock in my swirling panic. They love Emily, Sarah, he'd say, his voice more hopeful than convinced. They'll find a way. Their love always seems to have a price tag, David. I'd reply, my voice tight with a familiar hollow ache. And Mark's happiness is usually listed much, much higher than anything else. I remembered Mark's reckless teenage car accident, a crumpled fender and a hefty repair bill that my father had quietly paid off, dismissing it with a sigh as boys will be boys. Then I recalled my own request for a modest contribution towards my college student loan, met with a lengthy lecture from my father on self-reliance and the importance of managing one's own finances. Eleanor's eyes would positively sparkle when she recounted Mark's superficial charm or some minor social conquest. Yet her gaze would skim over my academic achievements or professional milestones as if they were footnotes in a far more interesting story, his. The night of the family meeting arrived, heavy with a sense of foreboding. As we drove to my parents' grand, ostentatiously decorated home, I clutched the file containing Emily's medical reports, each page a testament to the terrifying precipice on which our lives teetered. I prayed for a miracle, for a flicker of the unconditional love I always craved but rarely received. I prayed they would finally see me, see Emily, not as an inconvenience, but as family in desperate need. The moment we stepped into my parents' house, the air thrummed with a forced gaiety that grated on my raw nerves. It was clearly more than a small dinner. The scent of lilies, Jessica's favorite, I recalled with a pang, was overpowering, mingling with the rich aroma of catered food. A string quartet played softly in the corner of the sprawling living room, and champagne flutes clinked. Jessica, dripping in new diamonds, was holding court, her laughter a little too loud, her hand possessively on Mark's arm. The sheer opulence of the scene, set against the stark terror of Emily's critical condition, felt like a physical blow. My father, Richard, finally gestured for David and me to join him and Eleanor in his study. The heavy oak door, however, was left slightly ajar, as if to remind us we were a mere interruption to the more important festivities outside. Jessica's parents, the Penningtons, were visible in the adjoining sunroom, their expressions carefully neutral, but their presence a palpable pressure. I laid Emily's medical reports on the polished surface of my father's desk, my hands trembling despite my efforts to remain composed. I explained the diagnosis again, the surgeon's grim prognosis without immediate intervention, the soul-crushing figure of $120,000. My voice, thick with emotion, pleaded more than I intended. Eleanor wrung her hands, her eyes darting nervously towards Mrs. Pennington. "Sarah, darling," she began, her voice a carefully modulated whisper of regret. "Your timing is simply catastrophic. We've just committed, well, a considerable sum to Mark and Jessica's wedding. $300,000, to be exact." She paused, as if the figure itself was an irrefutable argument. "It's an investment, you see, in their future, in the family's image. We simply can't liquidate assets now. What would people say? The Penningtons are expecting a certain standard." My father nodded, his jaw set firmly, his gaze fixed somewhere over my left shoulder. "Your mother is right, Sarah. This wedding is a significant social and business event for Hamilton and Company. Canceling or even downsizing would be a public relations disaster. Mark is our future, the one who will carry on the Hamilton name and business." He waved a dismissive hand. "Besides, you're resourceful, Sarah. You and David will figure something out. You always do." A cold numbness spread through me. Resourceful, I whispered, the word catching in my throat. My daughter, Emily, needs this surgery to live. I looked at them, searching for any flicker of compassion, any hint that their granddaughter's life registered as more than an inconvenient financial request. What about the trust fund? The money I gave you years ago, the money that saved this business. Richard actually scoffed, a harsh, derisive sound. That was your duty as family, Sarah, a contribution made a long time ago. Don't bring that up now to try and make us feel guilty. This is entirely different. As if on cue, Mark sauntered in, Jessica glued to his side. She shot me a look of pure annoyance, as if I were a particularly tiresome insect. Honestly, Sarah, Mark drawled, his tone dripping with condescension. Always so dramatic. It's my big day soon, you know. The wedding of the year. Can't you, start a GoFundMe or something? Don't spoil the mood for everyone. Jessica chimed in, her voice like chipped ice. Some people are just unlucky, I suppose. It's terribly sad, of course, but one can't let it overshadow joyous occasions. My mother didn't meet my eyes. She merely waved a vague, dismissive hand. My father physically turned his back, ostensibly to adjust a picture on the wall. Mark smirked, the picture of smug indifference. It was then, in that opulent study, surrounded by the symbols of their priorities, that the last vestiges of my childhood illusions about my family shattered into a million irreparable pieces. They hadn't just said no. They had trivialized my daughter's life, weighed it against a party in their social standing, and found it wanting. I don't remember much about leaving. David's arm was a steel band around me, guiding me through the smiling, oblivious guests. The vibrant, perfectly manicured roses in my mother's prize garden seemed to mock me with their flamboyant, uncaring beauty as we walked to our car. Once inside, the carefully constructed dam of my composure finally broke. I sobbed, raw, agonizing gasps of grief and betrayal tearing through me. David held me, his own face a mask of cold fury and profound helplessness. He said nothing, and in his silence, I felt his complete understanding, his shared outrage. The drive home was a blur of tears and a dawning, terrifying clarity. When we got home, after checking on a sleeping, oblivious Emily, we made the call we'd been dreading, yet now clung to as our only hope. David's parents, George and Susan. He was a retired firefighter, she a retired nurse. Good, hardworking people who lived a modest life on their pensions. I explained everything, my voice hoarse and broken. There was a moment of shocked silence on the other end of the line. Then, Susan's voice, trembling but resolute, came through. Oh, Sarah, you poor things. That beautiful little girl. She paused, and I could hear George's gentle murmur in the background. Listen to me, Sarah, Susan continued, her tone firming with a fierce, unwavering love. Emily is our granddaughter, too, in all the ways that truly matter. We'll drain our retirement accounts tomorrow. We'll take out a reverse mortgage on the house. It's paid off, thank heavens. Don't you worry about the money for one more second. Do you hear me? George's gruff voice came on the line, thick with emotion. This is what family does, Sarah. No question. We'll be at the bank first thing in the morning. Tears streamed down my face again, but these were different. These were tears of overwhelming gratitude, of a love so pure and selfless it was a beacon in the suffocating darkness of my parents' betrayal. George and Susan, with so little to their names compared to the Hamiltons, were offering everything. They were showing me, in that single, stunning act of generosity, the true, unshakable meaning of family. And in that moment, amidst the wreckage of my old beliefs, a new resolve began to form, cold and hard as steel. I would save my daughter. I would repay these wonderful, selfless people who were sacrificing their security for us. And as for my parents and my brother, I would never forget. I would never forgive. Their cruelty had severed tie I once thought unbreakable. Emily's surgery was scheduled. The days leading up to it were a torment, but George and Susan's unwavering support, their daily calls, their quiet confidence, kept us afloat. While caring for Emily and navigating the terrifying medical labyrinth, I began to channel my grief and fury into something else. From a small desk in our spare bedroom, with Emily sleeping fitfully nearby, I started taking on freelance graphic design projects. It was a tiny beginning, born of desperation and a burning need to reclaim some agency. My parents sent a perfunctory, glad it all worked out for Emily, card a week after her successful surgery. Tucked inside was a link to Mark and Jessica's extravagant wedding gift registry. The casual cruelty of it stole my breath, but it also fanned the embers of that cold resolve into a steady, burning fire. I didn't reply. I was too busy fighting for my daughter's future, and unknowingly for my own. I later learned, through a casual remark from a former acquaintance of Mark's, that he'd heard I'd applied for a small business grant for women entrepreneurs to get my freelance work off the ground. He'd apparently made a concerned citizen call to the Grant Foundation, vaguely questioning my stability and seriousness, subtly implying I wasn't a good investment. I lost the grant. At the time, I couldn't prove his interference, but the seed of suspicion was planted, another layer added to the wall I was building around my heart where my birth family used to reside. They hadn't just abandoned me in my hour of need. They were actively, if pettily, trying to impede my efforts to recover. 5 years. 5 years can feel like a lifetime, or the blink of an eye. For me, it was both. Emily, thank God, was healthy, a vibrant, mischievous 11-year-old whose laughter was the daily anthem of our home. She was the living, breathing testament to the battle we'd fought and won, a constant reminder of what was truly precious. The tiny freelance design operation I'd started from our spare bedroom, fueled by a mother's fierce love and a betrayed daughter's quiet fury, had not just survived, it had flourished. I'd poured every ounce of my energy, creativity, and resilience into it. My best friend, Chloe, who had her own stories of navigating a toxic family and understood my drive on a visceral level, had joined me early on. Together, we co-founded Phoenix Designs. We didn't just work hard. We worked smart, identifying a niche market helping ethical startups and women-led businesses build their brands. There was one particularly challenging but ultimately triumphant campaign for a sustainable energy company that put us on the map, a turning point that led to bigger clients and wider recognition. Phoenix Designs became a name synonymous with innovation, integrity, and empathetic branding. My first and most sacred financial goal had been to repay George and Susan. It took time, relentless work, and meticulous saving, but the day I handed them a check that cleared their reverse mortgage and then presented them with the deed to their original home, which I'd managed to discreetly buy back for them after they'd been forced to downsize, was one of the proudest moments of my life. I also set up a secure trust fund to ensure their retirement years would be comfortable and worry-free. Their tearful, grateful hugs were worth more than any professional accolade. They were my true family, the gold standard against which all other relationships were measured. Contact with Richard, Eleanor, and Mark was minimal, relegated to curt, obligatory holiday dinners where the air was thick with unspoken resentments and their thinly veiled condescension. They seemed vaguely aware of my success, but dismissed it with faint praise, always steering the conversation back to Mark's supposed triumphs at Hamilton and Company. Triumphs I increasingly doubted. Through Chloe's extensive business network and the occasional unguarded comment from a mutual acquaintance, I'd heard whispers. Hamilton and Company was struggling. Their designs were dated, their business practices archaic. Mark, now a director of special projects, a title I suspected was largely ceremonial, was reportedly more interested in long lunches, expensive cars, and maintaining the lavish lifestyle Jessica demanded than in actual work. Jessica, for her part, had solidified her reputation as a relentless social climber, her happiness directly proportional to the balance in their bank account. The first real crack in their carefully constructed facade appeared unexpectedly. Mr. Henderson, a quiet, meticulous accountant who had worked for Hamilton and Company for over 30 years and had recently retired, contacted me. He'd always been kind to me in a reserved way during my brief, youthful attempts to work at the family business, and I sensed he'd never been fooled by Mark's bluster. He said he felt a moral obligation, a need to clear his conscience. We met for coffee. His revelation, delivered in hushed, precise tones, was a gut punch that reverberated through years of buried pain. My $150,000 trust fund, the money I believed had saved Hamilton and Company from a market downturn, it had, in fact, been used to secretly bail Mark out of a massive gambling debt and a fraudulent art investment scheme he'd gotten entangled in. His recklessness had brought the company to the brink of public scandal and financial ruin. My parents had lied, masterfully manipulating my youthful loyalty and naivety to shield Mark for the consequences of his potentially criminal actions, all while preserving their precious public image. Mr. Henderson, deeply troubled by what he'd uncovered over the years and disgusted by Mark's continued arrogance, had kept copies of certain old, concealed financial records. He handed me a discreet manila envelope. "I always thought you deserved to know the truth, Sarah," he said, his eyes filled with a sad understanding. The documents inside were irrefutable. The dates, the figures, the coded notations, it all painted a sickening picture of deceit. It wasn't just a party they had chosen over Emily's life. They had, for years, prioritized protecting Mark from his own destructive behavior, using my money, my sacrifice, as their shield. The betrayal deepened, its roots now exposed as rotten and far-reaching. My grief transmuted into a cold, clarifying anger, a resolve that settled deep in my bones. Hamilton and Company's decline accelerated. Poor investments, a failure to innovate, and, as I suspected, Mark's continuous siphoning of funds had left them drowning in debt. Their primary lender, a large commercial bank, was growing impatient and looking to offload the distressed debt portfolio that included Hamilton and Company. An idea, audacious and terrifying, began to take shape. I consulted Ms. Albright, the sharp, empathetic lawyer who had guided Phoenix Designs through several complex contracts. She was more than just a legal advisor. She had become a mentor, someone who saw my strength even when I doubted it myself. She listened to my story, examined Mr. Henderson's documents, and then laid out a strategy. It was legally sound, ethically defensible, and strategically brilliant. Using the profits from Phoenix Designs, and with Ms. Albright orchestrating the legal intricacies, I formed an anonymous holding company. Through this entity, we began discreetly purchasing Hamilton and Company's outstanding debt from the increasingly anxious creditors. It was a calculated risk, but I was no longer the naive girl who signed away her future. I was a businesswoman, a mother who had fought for her child's life, and a woman who would no longer allow her birth family's toxicity to define her. My initial motive wasn't revenge, not entirely. It was about control over my own narrative, control to ensure they could never again harm me or exploit anyone else, and perhaps a way to reclaim, in spirit, what had been so callously taken. As the new primary creditor, my holding company gained legal access to Hamilton and Company's complete digital archives for due diligence. Chloe, with her keen eye for detail, offered to help me sift through years of emails and financial records. It was tedious, emotionally draining work like excavating a toxic landfill. And then Chloe found it, an email chain buried deep in Mark's archive correspondence, dated precisely 5 years ago, during the week Emily was fighting for her life. Mark, using his official Hamilton and Company email address, had contacted the director of the charitable medical foundation I had desperately applied to for emergency funding for Emily's surgery. In meticulously crafted, subtly poisonous phrases, he had discredited me, painting me as emotionally unstable, prone to exaggeration, and not as financially desperate as she claims. He'd implied that providing me with funds would be a wasted investment when other, more deserving cases existed. He effectively sabotaged my application to ensure that all available family resources and any sympathy from their social circle remained squarely focused on his and Jessica's impending nuptials. The final email in the chain, a reply from Mark to a query from the director, ended with a chillingly self-righteous line. Family has to look out for its priorities, after all, and my wedding, at this juncture, is a paramount priority for the Hamiltons. I printed the emails, my hand surprisingly steady. The clinical, corporate language of his betrayal, set against the life-or-death urgency of Emily's situation, was obscene. David, when I showed him, simply held me, his silence speaking volumes of rage and sorrow. Mark wasn't just passively cruel, a spoiled beneficiary of parental favoritism. He was actively, maliciously, and strategically destructive. This was the final piece of the puzzle, the irrefutable proof of the depths of their collective depravity. The time for quiet maneuvering was over. Hamilton and Company was teetering on the brink of outright bankruptcy. Foreclosure loomed over my parents' mansion. Their lavish lifestyle, funded by debt and deceit, was about to implode. As expected, they finally reached out to me, not with humility or remorse, but with a breathtaking sense of entitlement, their voices laced with a desperate, demanding appeal to family obligation. Through Ms. Albright, I summoned Richard, Eleanor, and Mark to a meeting. Not in my office, nor at their crumbling estate. I chose the main conference room of Hamilton and Company, the very heart of their once proud empire, now echoing, stripped of its former glory, a fitting stage for the final act. I told them it was to discuss a potential bailout. David and Chloe would be there, silent pillars of support by my side. The trap was set. The reckoning was about to begin. The conference room at Hamilton and Company felt cavernous and cold, a stark contrast to the opulent vibrancy I remembered from my youth. Dust motes danced in the weak afternoon light, filtering through the grimy windows. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, and my brother, Mark, arrived looking harried and aged, their usual air of arrogant self-assurance noticeably diminished, replaced by a desperate, grasping hope. They clearly expected me to pull out a checkbook and make their problems disappear. Jessica was conspicuously absent. I later learned she had decamped to her parents' home once the creditors started calling in earnest. David stood quietly to my right, Chloe to my left. Ms. Albright sat beside me, a slim briefcase on the polished table in front of her. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice calm, devoid of the tremor I'd feared. "You asked for my help for a bailout. I'm here to discuss the terms." Richard leaned forward, a flicker of his old imperiousness returning. "Well, it's about time, Sarah. We're your family. We knew you'd do the right thing. Hamilton and Company needs a significant capital injection to stabilize." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Before we discuss any solutions, there are a few things we need to clarify." I looked directly at them, one by one. "Firstly, I am the principal owner of the holding company that has acquired all of Hamilton and Company's outstanding debt. In effect, I am your primary creditor." A stunned silence descended. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Richard's face went slack with disbelief, then hardened into a dark scowl. Mark just stared, his jaw agape. "Secondly," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "I am aware of the true circumstances surrounding my $150,000 trust fund." I nodded to Ms. Albright, who opened her briefcase and calmly laid out copies of Mr. Henderson's meticulously kept records, detailing Mark's gambling debts and the fraudulent art scheme. This money, my money, wasn't used to save the business from market downturn. It was used to cover up Mark's significant financial misdeeds, potentially criminal acts, to protect his reputation and, by extension, yours. Eleanor began to weep, not the performative tears I was used to, but genuine sobs of shock and, perhaps, shame. Richard remained rigid, his face ashen. Mark spluttered. Those are fabrications. Lies. Are they, Mark?" I asked, my gaze unwavering. "Then perhaps you can explain these." Ms. Albright then produced the printed email chain detailing Mark's deliberate sabotage of my application for Emily's medical funding. I read aloud his final, damning sentence. "Family has to look out for its priorities, after all. And my wedding, at this juncture, is a paramount priority for the Hamiltons." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Eleanor's ragged breathing. The carefully constructed facade of the Hamilton family had finally, irrevocably, crumbled. "You spoke of family priorities that day, and many times before," I said, the words measured, each one carrying the weight of years of pain. For the last 5 years, my priority was ensuring my daughter lived and thrived. Then, it was honoring the real family, George and Susan, who sacrificed everything for her when you wouldn't spare a dime. My priority was building a life and a business based on integrity, something this family discarded long ago. You, on the other hand, prioritized a wedding, a social image, and the protection of a son who has proven himself to be not just irresponsible, but malicious. Today, we discuss my priorities. Mark, cornered and exposed, finally erupted. He lunged across the table, not for the documents, but towards me, his face contorted with rage. "You think you could destroy us, you ungrateful." David moved instantly, stepping in front of me, his presence a calm, unshakable barrier. Two discreet security guards, prearranged by Ms. Albright, materialized from the adjoining office and firmly escorted a struggling, cursing Mark from the room. With Mark gone, Richard seemed to deflate, all the fight draining out of him. Eleanor just wept quietly. "Now," I said, turning back to my parents, "we discussed the terms of this bailout." I laid out two options, my voice devoid of malice, but equally devoid of sympathy. Option A, the clean break. I will proceed with the full liquidation of Hamilton and Company assets. After all other legitimate creditors are satisfied, you will receive whatever, if anything, remains. This will likely mean losing your home, your status, everything you value. Mark will also have to face any potential legal consequences from other creditors he may have defrauded. Option B, the conditional lifeline. I will absorb the salvageable remnants of Hamilton and Company into a new, ethically managed subsidiary of Phoenix Designs. This will protect the jobs of the few remaining innocent employees. You, Richard and Eleanor, will receive a small, fixed monthly allowance, enough for a modest apartment and basic living expenses. This allowance is strictly contingent upon two conditions. One, you both attend mandatory, individual, and family therapy sessions with a certified therapist of my choosing for a minimum of 1 year. Two, you sign a legally binding agreement, drafted by Ms. Albright, to have no contact whatsoever with me, David, or Emily, unless explicitly initiated and permitted by me in writing. I paused. Mark receives nothing from me. He is on his own. The choice was theirs. It was a bitter pill, but faced with utter ruin, they reluctantly, brokenly, chose option B. Ms. Albright handled the extensive legal paperwork, ensuring every clause was ironclad. Jessica, true to her nature, had already filed for divorce from Mark, citing irreconcilable differences and, I later heard, attempting to secure a favorable settlement by claiming ignorance of his financial dealings, a claim that held little water given her extravagant spending. The fall of Hamilton and Company was swift and public, though the specific details of our family confrontation remained private. The business community whispered, then moved on. Richard and Eleanor faded into obscurity, their social circle vanishing overnight. I heard through Ms. Albright that they attended the therapy sessions, though with little genuine engagement, going through the motions to secure their allowance. The legal agreement, however, they honored. The silence from them was a strange, unfamiliar peace. Mark, stripped of his family's protection and resources, drifted. The last I heard, he was struggling with a series of menial jobs, his arrogance long since replaced by a sullen resentment. He never attempted to contact me. I didn't find jubilant triumph in their downfall, but a quiet, somber sense of justice achieved and a profound liberation. Phoenix Designs absorbed what little was viable from Hamilton and Company, rebranding it as New Leaf Furnishings, specializing in sustainable, affordable designs, a quiet rebuke to its former elitism. The few loyal, long-serving employees were treated with the fairness and respect they'd long been denied. My true victory, however, lay elsewhere. With a significant portion of Phoenix Design's profits, I established the Emily Grace Foundation, dedicated to helping families navigate the financial burdens of pediatric medical crises. Watching the foundation make a tangible difference in other people's lives, offering them the hope and support I had so desperately needed, became my driving passion. It was there, in that constructive act of turning pain into purpose, that I found the deepest healing. Years have passed. Emily is a bright, compassionate young woman now, studying to be a doctor. David and I are stronger than ever, our life rich with the love of our chosen family. George and Susan, Chloe and her family, and the close-knit community we've built. The scars from my birth family remain, not as open wounds, but as faint, silvery lines, reminders of battles fought and lessons learned. They no longer dictate my life or my happiness. They tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed. My roots found nourishment not in the soil of my birth, but in the love I chose and the future I painstakingly built for myself, for my daughter, and now for others. I learned that true family isn't defined by blood, but by sacrifice, loyalty, and unwavering, unconditional love. Sometimes the bravest act is to walk away from the titles and expectations imposed upon you, and to build your own definition of home, of success, of legacy. I chose to redefine my family and my fortune. It wasn't an easy path, but it was mine, paved with tears, resilience, and ultimately a profound and enduring peace. And now, I want to ask you, the listener, have you ever had to make a choice that redefined your life? A choice that forced you to redraw the boundaries of your world? What does family truly mean to you, especially when blood ties betray the very essence of that sacred bond? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I truly want to hear your stories.